So let's get into that because, again, I asked in follow up if this meant maybe the Mariners could look back out on the trade market. And let me try to scroll up here into my messages and see if I can get exactly what our source said. No, I'll just paraphrase. So essentially, what I was told was that, or this was the exact response that I got was there's a growing confidence in Mariners camp that Chris Flexen's going to be traded before opening day. So that's really interesting, right? For a couple of reasons. The first, I mean, we've talked about how much having, Flexen as depth, kind of a fallback option, keeping him in the bullpen, maybe having him spot start here and there. We've talked about, Marco Gonzalez might have to go on paternity leave at some point in April. So, maybe Flexen will have to make a spot start there. And so, the other thing too is, can you get a bat for him? Can you get a bench bat? Can you get someone that essentially replaces Tommy La Stella's spot on this roster for, a year of Chris Flexen? Does he actually hold that kind of value for you where you can get a valuable, major league position player that essentially outweighs the value of keeping someone like Chris Flexen around? So the other thing too, right, is we talked about this a few episodes ago. Jason Churchill, friend of the show, on his podcast, Baseball Things, on Patreon, has talked about how the Mariners have been apparently reaching out to teams about starting pitching, and not necessarily, all-star caliber starting pitching, but guys that would maybe fit on the back end of their rotation. So to me, if I'm just kind of trying to put two and two together here, if what Church is hearing is correct and what our source is hearing is correct, then maybe the plan is for the Mariners to go out, get a starting pitcher. Who knows how that impacts Marco Gonzalez in this whole thing? That's a whole nother conversation to have. But they go out, they get another starting pitcher, and then they trade Flexen, or vice versa. They trade Flexen first, and then go out and get the starting pitcher. That makes quite a bit of sense.
Right.
What do you make of all of this?
I think, it's a good question. I think it's about covering your bases more or less. You want to make sure that if you do trade Chris Flexen, you have this backup plan, right? And you have this comfort level in knowing that, well, we may be trading Flexen, but we do have this viable major league starter. And, it's worth noting that we were not told that what pitchers they were asking about. We did not hear that. But we were told, as all of Jason's podcast listeners were, we don't have any special insight here, that they're major league quality arms. They're not looking at like 4A types. They're looking for legitimate major league starters, back end guys. So I think it's more about, hey, look, if we have to make a move with Flex, right? If we can get to a move we like with Flex, then we can make this trade comfortably. So I think you're right. I think it is more about like, hey, we think we can trade Flex for this, but we don't want to do it until we've backed ourselves up with a viable big league option that isn't like Bryce Miller or Taylor Dollard or Emerson Hancock. So I think it's probably a bit about that, but I think it's just value, right? Like, let's sniff around, let's see what happens. And by the way, if you get to a point where you do acquire that back end guy and he starts pitching well for you or whatever, maybe you get to a point where you get into June, July, and you are willing all of a sudden to move Bryce Miller because of this guy that you picked up, and you feel good about the back end of your rotation. So I think it's mostly just, just covering our bases. Let's just make sure that we have enough pitching so that if we do trade Flex and if Marco does struggle, we're not rushing these young guys up to the big leagues. And if the arm that we identify works out and he's pitching better than a number 5 starter, then all of a sudden we can trade, Dollard or Hancock or Miller for, something that could help us more at the plate. So I think it's more about that than anything else.
And maybe even if they don't get a supplementary arm and they trade Flexen, maybe that's a signal that they they think that Miller might be ready by May or so. That they feel pretty confident about that. And obviously he's had a pretty decent start to spring and obviously garnered a lot of attention. But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see kind of just how this whole roster shakes out. Because like it going into spring, we talked about this when we did our roster projections, that it felt like everything was pretty much chalk, more or less.
Yeah.
Especially like, in the bullpen, right? Because there's just so many guys that are more or less locked in there. But maybe, if Flexen gets traded, right? And they don't have a supplementary arm there, maybe that opens up the door for someone like Perlander Baroa to make the
Hmm.
bullpen out of the gate. And I was told by our source that they are very high on Baroa, that they're pretty much equally as excited about Baroa as they've been about Marlowe. But I was also, at the same time told that our source still feels that Justin Topa and Trevor Gott still have the inside track on that final spot in the bullpen. But
Right.
again, if Flexen is gone, they don't add a supplementary arm. That's another spot that opens up in that bullpen, and there you go. Now Baroa or Topa essentially are competing for that final spot.
Right. It's probably going to go to Topa
Yeah,
at that point. But again, there's still different. There's still what 18 to 20 odd games left to go in the Cactus League even. So
yeah,
there's still injuries that can occur. There are other smaller trades. For all we know, the Mariners are trading. They end up trading Penn Murphy and not Chris Flexen. Like something
yeah.
like that's possible. So
Hmm.
especially they're looking for kind of a major league bat. We're going to start to hear more about players who are out of options and don't look like they're going to make their team. And those guys are going to be appealing for a team like Seattle, who has at bats to give. Two guys that, in the limited amount of time I did some research on this, two guys that kind of make some sense to me, not perfect sense, but Lamont Wade Jr. of the Giants, late night Lamont, big time, clutch base hits, but he really struggled last year, and he's more of a platoon bat, but he is a strong
And the
side
Mariners
pitcher.
and Giants love making trades with one
They
another around this time of year.
they do, and judging by what they gave up to get Baroa and what they gave up to get Tom Murphy a few years ago, you could probably get Wade for
Me.
yeah. I mean, I do that, sure. So yeah,
Trade me the
especially if
Locked On Giants.
right, right. Unfortunate for Ben, but unfortunately, the one thing that kind of maybe is not making that likely is that Austin Slater looks like he's going to start the year on the IL for the Giants, and
Mhm.
Donovan Walton is going to start the year on the IL. So there's kind of two open spots on that roster. So feels like Wade's probably going to make that roster, but we'll see. That's definitely a guy that you can check on. And ironically enough, we do know that one of the teams that one of the teams that the Mariners are asking about their pitching is I have no idea how to structure the sentence,
Sure.
is
I'm
the
following you.
Giants or is the National League West team. Well, the Giants and the Mariners make a lot of trades, so
Right.
naturally it kind of leads to that assumption. So maybe it's, you know, Wade and a pitcher that they like for,
Mm.
you know, nothing. um the
A
the
ham sandwich.
I mean
A
that
coupon to Pizza Hut.
the coupon to Pizza Hut is going to be more valuable than whatever they traded Tom Murphy for. So, um, and the other guy who uh, I like the player, but I mean, we talk, man, if we're going to criticize Cade Marlowe for strikeouts, Keston Hira, oh man,
Yeah.
that that dude somehow struck out like 40% of the time last year and still posted a 115 WRC plus.
Really?
Yes,
That's crazy.
I I mean, look it up, man. Like seriously, go look at the numbers right now. You will be blown away. You look at his slash line, you look at the strikeout rate, and you'll go,
I'm doing that right now. Hold on.
and we'll go, what? He did what? But he is out of options. He's a former first round pick. We know how much Jerry loves those guys. Really first base DH type, but he can play second if you need him to. And yeah, he's just never really found his footing in Milwaukee.
Wow. Listen
Yeah,
to this. All right.
yeah,
So Keston Hira, not to get super sidetracked here, but like he played 80 games last year, 266 plate appearances. Like Colby said, struck out
yeah.
41.7%, 8.6 walk percentage. He slashed 226, 316, 449, which is good for a 115 WRC plus. 14 home runs, 32 ribs, 5 stolen bags.
Yeah.
That is one of the wildest stat lines I've ever seen in my entire life.